Okay, so this is going to be a really quick recording, and it's just going to kind of wrap up Rome. So I'm just going to talk about the late Empire, and then the next series of lectures will be about the Byzantine era and a little bit of the time period kind of leading up to the Byzantine. So let's see. If you're watching this in the future, you might be able to tell that it is Halloween. So on campus today, I am dressed as Yayoi Kusama, famous modernist installation artist who started her career in the early 60s and is still making work today, though she's like very nearly 90, if not 90 already. Very fabulous. If you take Art History 2 with me, we talk about Yayoi Kusama. She's very into polka dots. So that is I changed my hair a lot. Those of you who have had multiple classes with me or have followed this channel, but this is actually a wig. This is not my actual hair today. So if you don't know who Yayoi Kusama is, look her up. She's one of my very favorite artists, big fan. Okay, so let's catch up. So last time I talked about the High Empire, and we talked a lot about Trajan, and then we talked quite a bit about this guy. Remember him? Hadrian. So those were the Spanish emperors, because they were both from Spain, so from which was part of the Roman Empire at the time, but from outside of what we now know, now would think of as Rome and Italy. We talked about the Pantheon. Very important building. We talked about how Hadrian not only set beards as the trend for the Roman Empire for the next 120 years or so, but he was also an amateur architect. We looked at the fabulous building from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and I think I told you kind of the myths surrounding that a little bit. We talked about the advent of insula or apartment buildings. We talked a little about Marcus Aurelius and how emotionalism starts playing a larger part in sculpture and expressivism. Expressive kind of emotional content starts becoming part of the work. Then we talked a little bit about sarcophagi, about Yaya of Cyzicus, who was one of the earlier people who was artist who was famous for encaustic painting, which I talked about for a little bit, and then showed this example of encaustic painting, which became quite popular. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the late Empire. So the late Empire begins with the Severans. We're going to talk about them for a little bit, and then we have the soldier emperors, and a lot of the work and the development that happens in this time period is covered in our discussion in this class online. So I don't go into a whole lot of stuff. Like I said, this is kind of a pretty brief little lecture. The most important things we'll talk about kind of the beginning and the end of the late Empire, which the beginning being the Severans, and then the end being when Constantine takes over. Constantine is pretty important. We're going to talk about him when we start talking about the Byzantine era next time as well. I might have to take this wig off. It's kind of driving me crazy. Let's see how terrible my hair is underneath. Okay, so just keep in mind this is wig hair. All right. Okay, no more Yayoi Kusama hair. Sorry about that. Let's talk about the Severans. Okay, so we have Marcus Aurelius was the leader that we were last talking about. Then his son Commodus takes over. Commodus is assassinated, and then the next leader is this guy. This is Sepimus Severus, and he was born in Africa, so he's an emperor of the Roman Empire, and part of that empire stretches over particularly the northern coast of Africa. And he's born in Africa. He declares himself Marcus Aurelius' son. That's not exactly proven. We don't know that for sure. But he's a super interesting figure. This is the only painted portrait of him that we have. It's painted with tempera paint, which is interesting in and of itself, and we'll talk about it in a minute. But we don't have that many painted portraits of emperors. We mostly have sculpted busts and things like this. So this is a very interesting artifact to have. And one thing that I think is super interesting about him is he sort of challenges our visual idea of what a Roman emperor looks like, right? In film, generally the guy who's the Roman emperor, whichever emperor it may be, is a super pale white guy speaking with a British accent. That's what we're kind of used to. So this is a really interesting figure in history because he's born in Africa. He is African. And he, in this portrait, we can see is darker skinned, right? He's darker skinned than his kids or his wife who were portrayed with him. And so it's kind of an interesting challenge to this sort of set kind of trope that we have for what the leader of the Roman Empire looks like, which I think is pretty cool. I like challenging historical figures, and I particularly like historical figures that are from traditionally marginalized population groups who actually have these fantastic, important historical roles. So I think that Sepimus Severus is a super interesting guy. Let's talk a little bit about why some of the other things that are interesting about this artwork. First of all, he commissioned many portraits of himself, and he often is portrayed in a way that's supposed to draw connections between him and Marcus Aurelius. Kind of that idea we've seen over and over again, this sort of propagandic element of the arts where it's trying to back up this claim he had that Marcus Aurelius was his father. And we've seen from the beginning of back in the Roman Republic days that having images of your ancestors is important in terms of your kind of class rank and societal rank. So he has a lot of things commissioned that show him and Marcus Aurelius together or show them kind of in similar poses and things like this. This is one of the earliest pieces that's known that is using tempera paint. Tempera paint is very interesting. When we get into the Byzantine and into the Middle Ages, we're going to see lots and lots of tempera paint, and it's going to stick with us through the Renaissance. Renaissance is the next class, art history too, where then oil paint kind of becomes more popular and takes over. Tempera paint is very interesting. So it's a pigment where the pigment itself, so a lot of times this was made from crushed minerals or semi-precious stones, things like this, is mixed with egg yolk as a binder. So we have egg yolk mixed in, so it's literally the yolk of an egg mixed with paint. So it creates these really rich tones, but you have to be careful with the application because if it's too thick, it cracks and breaks off. So it can only be done in these sort of thin, little like kind of translucent glazes, but it creates this really rich, beautiful tone. And as I said, it becomes the kind of #1 painting medium for hundreds and hundreds of years in Europe. So we see it come in here, but it sticks around for a long time. The other interesting thing about this work is the substrate, the surface that it is painted on is in a round shape, which we haven't really seen very much of, right? Things tend to be kind of rectangular, or they're attached to the wall, right? They're a fresco, literally part of the wall. So when we see round paintings like this, they're called tondo. So a tondo is like a round portrait. So that's another term that comes up. So we have, this is, he's the emperor, and then we have his children portrayed here with him. Caracalla is his son, and he succeeds his dad. He has his brother Greta, who's the figure whose face is blocked out here, executed and damned. He has the Senate damn him and damn his memory, which is why he's been removed from this painting. So the face erasure is one of the things when you get this declaration from the Senate. So Caracalla was pretty ruthless. Let's take a peek at him. Here he is. So this is Severus's son, Caracalla, and he is he's kind of a ruthless leader. We don't see quite as much artwork during this period as with his dad. He wasn't as into commissioning tons and tons of artwork. You can see this portrait of him at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. One of the things that I like to point out here is we can see we still have this interest in naturalism. We still have kind of an interest in verism, right? You can see the kind of wrinkle in his forehead. You can see the texture of his his little bit of a beard, which beards are still popular thanks to our friend Hadrian, right? You can see the texture of his hair. So this is a fairly realistic portrayal, and he looks kind of angry. So we're still kind of seeing this emotional content in the artwork that started really with Marcus Aurelius, right? So he looks a little bit like intense and kind of like fearsome. So very kind of intense facial expression here. Okay, so after the Severans, that's what this line is called, the Severans, we have the soldier emperors. They're not as into building as some of the guys before them. We have some new defensive walls and things that go up. There are many portraits, there are many coins to assert their authority. So a couple of you are writing about work that happened during that time period, so we'll learn a little bit more about them in the discussion, but they're kind of nicknamed the soldier emperors because they're not part of a long dynasty, a long line like the Severans, the Julians, these people, the Flavians. Then we have a lot of battles that are quite important. So we have foes coming in from the north. So we have Romans fighting off the barbarians. Romans kind of called everyone who wasn't Roman a barbarian. That was sort of a catch-all phrase, but particularly people coming from the north who tended to be taller and hairier. So this is the Goths, the Visigoths, coming down from the north. Diocletian in 293 establishes a tetrarchy. A tetrarchy is a rule by four. So he decides a good idea, because they have all these foes coming in from everywhere trying to fight them, is to split up the Roman Empire and have four different emperors ruling it, because then they're each in charge of an area. It's kind of like if you play basketball, it's kind of like a zone defense. Like, all right, you take care of this, and you take care of this, and you take care of this, and I'll take care of this, and then we can fend off all these foes. He must have not been super familiar with the idea of divide and conquer, because dividing up your command and your territory is not necessarily the best kind of defense. It works for a while. So he sets this up in 293 until about 305. These four guys are ruling and are getting along, and everything's kind of okay. So, you know, a good 10 years or so in there. And then we have Constantine. So this is Constantine. This is from a gigantic sculpture of him. The head itself is 8 feet high, so it's quite large. So Constantine is very famous. He's one of the more important figures in European history and world history. And his dad was one of those four rulers, was one of those four tetrarchs. And in 312, he decides that he thinks this is a bad system and that there should just be one emperor. And he takes control of all of the Roman Empire. And one of the things that's significant about Constantine, historically and culturally, is that he attributes his victory to taking over the Roman Empire to the Christian God. So one of the big things that's happened in relatively recent times is the advent of Christianity in Europe. Not a very popular religion at this time, but Constantine does a lot he's kind of why Christianity thrives in Europe, and really why Christianity is as widespread as it is even today. So he's an important historical figure for a lot of reasons, one of them being that he definitely shaped the landscape of the future of Christianity and its popularity as a religion. So one of the things he does is he signs the Edict of Milan, which ends the persecution of Christians. Christians were persecuted at this time. They had to be kind of secretive because it was not the official religion, and it was not a condoned religion within the Roman Empire. In 325, he has the Council of Nicaea, which is where we get the Nicene Creed, which I'll talk about a little bit when I talk about the Byzantine artwork and the way Christ is portrayed, because it has a little to do with that. This also means that Christianity has become the de facto religion of the empire. Okay, so that's one big thing, is he makes Christianity the religion of the Roman Empire. And so he unifies, so we're not having four-part empire anymore. So that's thing one. He makes Christianity the religion of the empire. That's a big thing too. And the third really big thing he does is he makes a new capital of the Roman Empire. So instead of the capital being Rome, he moves it east and establishes Constantinople in 330. So in 330, he moves the seat of Rome to Constantinople, which, yes, is a city he has named after himself. And this is kind of a big shift. This is the transition from the ancient world of the Roman Empire into the medieval world. And that's when we start getting into the Byzantine period. So Constantine builds a lot of things in Rome. He builds bathhouses, he builds roads, he builds a forum, he builds a big basilica, an arch, and he's also the patron of the first churches. So he's also building churches, okay? So some of you are assigned some of these things that he builds in this time period, and we also see a big return of Augustan style portraiture, which is not so much verism as showing him constantly young, showing this sort of godlike, unaging figure of the emperor. You'll notice he doesn't have a beard, so he looks younger than the last 100 years of guys who've been following Hadrian's lead. He creates Basilica Nova, which is this 300-foot high, 215-foot wide, 20 feet thick walls, big basilica. One of you is writing about that. So we see a lot of things happen really quickly that really shift the entire culture quite a lot in Europe. So this is a huge period of transition, and everything gets a little bit up in the air and gets a little bit crazy. But we're going to talk about it more next time when we talk about Byzantine. One of the things that we will talk about, and a couple of you were talking about this in the discussion, are the coins that have Constantine's face on them. I want you to pay special attention to the back of those coins, several of them which have what we call a Christogram. A Christogram is the Greek letter chi and the Greek letter rho intersecting each other, so it's like an X with this kind of thing that looks sort of like a P intersecting it, and he put this on his helmet. Constantine had this on his helmet and on his shield when he went into battle and felt that it protected him, okay? And so the chi rho, that's the first two letters of Christ in Greek, and so this is part of where he brings in this belief he has that the Christian God protected him. There's some other less kind reasons that he implements Christianity throughout the empire that we'll talk about later. A lot of it was to do with control as well, but that symbol, the chi rho, is still a Christian symbol today, and we'll talk about it a little bit more next time because it becomes pretty popular in the Byzantine era. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these things that I just talked about, and then I'll send you off to your discussion to do your research and post about the Roman Empire. So this is the Basilica Nova. So this is that huge building that I told you that he built, and we can see the ruins of it here and then a reconstruction of it over here. And so we'll learn a little bit more about that in the discussion, and then next time we'll talk about Byzantine art. All right, thanks.